That's nice. Blade to cut the ring. Sauron's hand.
Hi all my Maverick gamers. Welcome back to another episode. We are today talking about equipment in Dungeons and Dragons. Now specifically we're talking about when you make a new character in Dungeons and Dragons, how you go about acquiring your equipment. So there's many options when you make a Dungeons and Dragons character about how you can go about doing it. And I'm not going to get into the who's and how's and the best way to make a character, but there is one specific thing that's been bothering me and I want to talk about it. When I first started in Dungeons and Dragons, there wasn't a lot of rules per se. The players' handbook were very free form. They presented a set of rules and it was really up to the dungeon master and the players to interpret how to do them. Now lucky for me, I came into the hobby after being a player with an experienced dungeon master, and some of his homebrew rules and some of his things just kind of stuck with me when I started dungeon mastering my own games. One of them was when we were making our characters, how we went about acquiring our equipment. Now, throughout the generations, Dungeons & Dragons has refined the rules and outlined various different processes for players actually acquiring their starting gear. Most recently in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, you actually have an option of choosing gold or starting equipment. Now, you can imagine my surprise when I got a hold of 5th edition and I saw that the option there was to have starting equipment. This blew my mind for a couple reasons. The amount of money that players started with in the original Dungeons & Dragons games, talking Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, Basic Dungeons & Dragons, and even 2nd edition, was typically not enough to cover all the starting equipment that a player would really want. Very rarely would a first level player start off in a dungeon wearing scale mail armor, carrying a great sword, a backpack, and all sorts of extra stuff. It was commonly accepted that, when you went shopping for your equipment, you would have minimal resources to acquire your starting gear. So Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition allows you two options. You can choose starting equipment or you can choose starting gold. I'm going to show you why I think starting gold is actually a better way for you to introduce your players to the world of Dungeons & Dragons. Here I have a starting character that I've created, Barbados the Paladin, and I have now faced, after going through all the other processes, the option of choosing equipment or gold. I'm going to show you the starting equipment first, just so you can get an idea of sort of the value that you're acquiring when you choose starting equipment. So starting equipment, you're basically going to have the option to choose a weapon, primarily, or a variety of weapons. So as you'll see here, Paladin starting equipment, I can choose a martial weapon and a shield, or two martial weapons. A martial weapon and a shield, when they populate it, you have a list of any and all the weapons you want to choose from. So quite literally, I could actually come in here and I could choose a greatsword. And remember that choice when we get to it, so we can see the value of a greatsword. The other option is I have javelins. I have 5 javelins or a melee weapon. So if I chose another melee weapon here, like say for example, a dagger, just try and keep an eye on the cost of that. Okay. Now we're down to our holy symbol and our chainmail. Now I'm going to stop right there. One of the big things that I have a problem with in this process is that, and you'll see I'll talk about it in a second, is that I'm just going down a list making selections. The amount of time that I'm investing in this thought process is very minimal at this point. It's more I'm ticking off the boxes just to get ahead so I can actually start playing the game. But I would argue that making these purchases, if you go the gold route, is actually a part of the character development, a part of the game that we're actually kind of just stripping out at this point. Keep going down the list here. It now tells me that I have a set of fine clothes, a signet ring, a scroll dictating my pedigree, as well as a purse containing 25 gold. So I get all of that, and I get a coin purse filled with 25 gold. I could quite literally go shopping again. So I'm going to add that starting equipment. Okay, and voila, it's in my character inventory. I'm going to show you what that looks like. Go back to the character sheet. So as a player point of view, I've spent maybe 2 minutes on probably the most important part of Dungeons & Dragons in making a new character that you could actually do. And I've spent maybe 60 seconds or less just going through clicking off some boxes. So lo and behold, when I look here, I've got my chain armor. This just now blends in to your D&D Beyond character sheet. This is just more writing in a sea of writing that your character sheet has. It's not even an afterthought for the player that he's carrying around a great sword, a shield, a dagger, and his chain armor. Now, there's an old adage in life that I've sort of followed and I've been told throughout life, is that things that are given don't have as much value to the person who they were given to. That dagger, that chainmail, that shield, that sword have no value at this point. They were simply given it, and if the opportunity arose for a player to just chuck that piece of equipment aside in favor of a different piece of equipment that they find while adventuring, they'll do it. Now, in popular fiction and stories and literature and movies, we often see heroes, adventurers carrying around equipment, and more than not, they actually keep those same pieces of equipment throughout their career and throughout their journey. And they don't really specifically say in those pieces of literature or movies why, but there's always a story behind it. If you think about it, if somebody gave them a sword, they're going to keep that sword close to them. So now I'm going to go back, and we're going to go and approach this from a different manner. And I'm going to explain to you why I think this is a great way to do it for your games. So we're going to go back to equipment, and we're going to choose gold. Okay, it's going to roll a random amount of gold for us, just like it did back in the day. It's going to, in this case, 5d4 times 20 gold. So the maximum gold I'm going to get is basically 200 at this point. So we're going to roll it, and away we go. So I have 165 gold pieces. So this is my starting wealth. This is now, what I've got to work with. Now, before you start opening up the player's handbook and start going through it, there's one thing that I think you should actually take into account. Why not make the purchasing of their equipment a little bit of part of the role play? Now, it stands to reason that some of this equipment they've acquired, and the gold is simply a representation of how much wealth they have acquired. But at the same time, you might want to lean into the role playing and introduce them to the game world via their starting equipment option. When I first started playing D&D, the first session was us going into town, visiting the vendors, visiting the armor shop, visiting the blacksmith, visiting the clothing vendor, basically spending our money. And a large portion of that session was spent negotiating, role-playing, getting to know the local vendors, the funny voices of the different characters, easing into the game world so that the players actually realize that, hey, there is a place that I can go to buy equipment and buy weapons and armor, and it's this guy or that guy. It creates a sort of a sense of immersion in the game world in that way. So having said that, you now have money, and the player can go through and start purchasing his gear. To go shopping, it's going to be presented right in front of them as far as all the items that they can purchase, but it's up to you, the Dungeon Master, to sort of infuse that with a little bit of flavor, a little bit of lore. So let's just start off with some basics. I have 165 gold, and I want to buy some armor. So you can say to your players, is this armor you've already acquired? And if they say, yeah, I've had this armor, and here's why I have the armor and who gave it to me, great. Let's go through. Is there anything that you don't have that you maybe have some money in hand as part of your story, and before you start your adventuring career, you want to actually go and purchase? Or maybe you've been adventuring and you've broken an item, and now it's time for you to replace it. So you maybe had a sword prior, but now we're going to take all this money that you have as starting wealth and purchase a new one. So you can go in here and you can select basically from the types. In this case here, we can type weapon, click weapon. And then there's a list of all the different weapons. So instead of just clicking I get it, let's go back to that great sword. Remember we talked about that automatic starting with the great sword? Let's see how much that's going to cost us. So we go down here to G, and we see great sword. So that great sword is going to cost 50 gold. So I have 165 gold pieces. Surely I have enough. Let's spend the 50 gold on it. At this point, you might now want to segue into a negotiating encounter. You might want to use some of those social skills of the player, show them how persuasion can be done. Maybe introduce them to this weaponsmith. A small gnome weaponsmith approaches. He can barely see you from above the counter. He steps up on a small stool, so he's eye to eye with you, and he sort of says in a shrill voice, "What do you want?" There you go. There's a typical encounter. Well, you want a sword, do you? Well, we got lots of swords. Allow that player interaction to take place and have some fun with it, and that will show the players that they have some agency in the game now, and they have the ability to interact with NPCs and get what they need. He might not pay 50 gold for that sword by the time he walks out. Maybe he'll get it on special. So let's just add it to our character sheet. So I'm going to add that. There we go, added. So now I don't have 165 gold anymore. I have 115 gold. So let's go back and look at armor now. We talked about, how much can I get from my 165. Now, in the previous example, I started off with chainmail armor and a great sword. So let's look and see how much that chainmail costs. 75 gold pieces for that chainmail armor. So you can get an idea and the value now. You can say to that player, like, that armor costs 75 gold pieces. Are you going to be so quick to just get rid of that armor at the first chance you can, for maybe a better suit, maybe not a better suit? But not only that, you've added in some role play. So later on down the road, if your player starts to wear his armor and take lots of hits and it's protecting him, and you say to that player, hey, your chain armor is starting to get worn, you can see links missing, and the protection it's giving you is starting to erode. Sure enough, that player is going to look at that and say, oh God, I spent 75 gold on this, I want to fix it. I don't want to spend 75 gold to buy a new set of armor. You're giving them value for that piece of inventory. As they start to adventure, they're going to start to equate value to these items, and then also proportionally to other things that maybe they're going to purchase, whether that be a horse and a night stay at an inn. They're going to see value in the currency. And I think that's missing from a lot of games, that they stop seeing the worth of a gold piece. So that's all really I wanted to talk about tonight in this short video, is I wanted to tell Dungeon Masters that, take a step back before just clicking on starting equipment. I think in the end you'll find some opportunity for roleplay, as well as giving them a sense of worth as their gold accumulates in the game. They're going to see that they can equate that to what they can buy with it. Gold will then become more important, more valuable. I think your players would appreciate it. So thanks for tuning in. Have fun playing Dungeons & Dragons out there, guys. Before you go, I need your help. I'm trying to grow the exposure of what we do here at Maverick Games. My goal is to actually bring information to parents and students around the world in hopes that they can see gaming as a path forward for learning, academics, and even support of neurodivergency. Please subscribe, make sure you click on those notifications, and I hope that you'll find content here that will be helpful for you and maybe others. Thank you very much, and thanks for tuning in.